You are listening to Love Your Practice with Dr. Laura Mock. I'm a general dentist, a practice owner, and a certified life coach. I teach women who own dental practices to lead with intention and literally fall in love with their businesses. Keep listening and you will see how learning to love your practice turns into loving your life too. Hello, I'm Dr. Laura Mock. Welcome to another episode of my podcast. How's everybody doing? Are you guys getting along okay? It sounds to me like everyone's having a busy summer, and I have a lot of clients who are really busy right now, but then I have a couple who are having sort of a lull in their demand. Just wondering how all of you guys are feeling. I am in a lull in my demand, and I think it has to do with the fact that I dropped the big dental insurance contract earlier this year, but things are starting to like backfill or trickle in a little bit. So it's been nice. And I just got back from the Happy Dentist Retreat, which is put on by Dr. Ankur Gupta. That was in Columbus this year. I think next year it might be in a city that's a little easier to get to. And it was wonderful. We learned so much from him and Dr. Anissa Holmes and Dr. Alan Stern, and I spoke. And honestly, I think it was really well received. If you're interested in something like that, it's a team and doctor experience. We did yoga, we hiked, there was a lake, we looked at the water. We learned about how to be better teams and have a better practice, and we got CE out of it and a trip. So that'll happen again next year in case you're interested. Today, we're going to be talking, I interviewed another really fascinating dentist, Dr. David Maloli, who wrote he leads a thing called The Relentless Dentist, and he wrote a book called Dentist on a Mission. And it's not very different from my message. It's just, he's a man and I'm a woman, and I have my own way that I've learned it, and he has his way. And he's just so smart and helpful. And I was like, we just definitely have to have a podcast with him on. And we talked about leadership using, it's not a personality profile, but it's leadership kind of action profile based on a thing called cognition, which is why you take action. And this is called the Kolbe test. So he is Kolbe-certified, and I have used Kolbe in my practice to understand my team members and why they do what they do and why I do what I do and why we respond to each other in certain ways. So it's a really, really helpful episode. Do yourself a favor, listen to the whole thing, and I will see you on the other side. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, without any further ado, I would like to welcome to our podcast, Dr. David Maloli. Dr. David Maloli, thank you so much for joining us today.
Laura, it's a pleasure. The first time we connected on my show, it was such a free-flowing conversation. I felt like we had a similar path and we spoke the same language. So I'm excited to deepen that conversation today.
I know we are preaching the same choir, basically, the same sermon, I mean, and just from different perspectives a little bit, but there's a lot in common there. And for anyone who's interested in listening, we'll include that episode where Dr. Maloli interviewed me. That was, I don't know, less than a year ago, I think, 6 months maybe. In the show notes, so you can look that up if you want to. But I asked you onto my show for a specific purpose, and that's because, globally speaking, you are a coach for dental practice owners like I am, and you have background. You have been trained in different ways. So even though we're speaking the same sermon, it's like I grew up Episcopalian and you grew up Catholic, maybe, or something, but basically we're preaching the same thing.
Precisely. Yeah, I love that.
And you are a Kolbe-certified trainer. When I say Kolbe for the listeners, it's Kolbe. And I'm going to have you explain to us what that means.
So interesting background. I came across Kolbe almost by accident. I was in a coaching group and they told us to take it. And I found the self-awareness that I was a quick start, and all of a sudden I felt like this freedom and liberation, and why I have thousands of books, most of which I haven't finished. I was hardwired that way. And it created this compassion amongst myself and my team. But the interesting piece of this innovation, I'm a sports fan, and any sports fans will appreciate that we hear when it comes draft time, this idea of Wonderlic. Like you'll hear this kind of ruthless report about these people scored the highest on the Wonderlic in the NFL draft, and these people shouldn't even be given a driver's test because they're so low on the Wonderlic. And Wonderlic is Kathy Kolbe's father. And growing up, there was this debate of, does IQ matter as much as Wonderlic thinks? And Kathy said, no, it doesn't. And he said, well, when you grow up, you can have your own assessment. And she came up with this and has been spending most of her life, she's, I think, near 80 now, understanding this part of the mind that most people don't talk about. Even brain researchers kind of dismiss this. But the interesting thing about Kolbe is it's how we're hardwired to do things given the freedom to be ourselves. So it's the doing aspect, not the thinking aspect, not the feeling aspect, but the doing aspect, and it's called cognition. So when you take this 15-minute assessment, you start to understand this is how I do things if given permission. And if somebody tells me to do it another way, I start to feel all sorts of strain and uncomfortable. And some of us have lived in that world of strain and uncomfortable for literally our entire careers. So I think it's a really important point to mention, is that it's kind of foreign to most people, but once you appreciate it, it sets you free, because it's cradle to grave. Meaning if I take it in 30 years, I might fluctuate a little bit, but it's so valid that no matter what my circumstances are, it's not likely to be like, oh, my personality has changed dramatically over the years. This will not.
Okay, so let me give you an example that I think illustrates what you mean by do you say conation or cognition?
Cognition.
Cognition. Okay. So basically what are the conditions we need to actually go from thinking about something to doing it, right? This is when I take action. So I have a pretty big office, and I just recently last year brought in an associate, and she and I are opposite ends of the spectrum as far as Kolbe is concerned. So cognition, she is really high in what we call follow through and fact finder. So she's kind of like would make a really, really good secretary, but also she's a dentist. And then I'm high in what you mentioned, which is quick start, meaning I got a bunch of things going and it doesn't take me very long to jump to the next whatever thing I'm doing. And so you can probably imagine that my desk is covered in piles of things and old coffee stains. And I know where the things are, but I kind of almost need it to be like that. Right. Whereas hers is spotless, and she has a little board up with a saying, and her pens are clean and put in the, like everything is just very nice. And I noticed sometimes when I would come to work, my desk had been tidied while she was working and I was not. And it's kind of like she is craving that order because it makes it easier for her to work, whereas I'm kind of almost craving disorder. Is that a good example of how Kolbe helps you understand those differences? Or like, I don't have to be mad at her for her desire to straighten out my desk. And maybe she can also give me the grace of knowing that this is just how I operate.
Right. I think when it becomes a common nomenclature in an organization, it creates that sense of compassion of like, this is my way, it is right, would be typical. But high functioning, low conflict, what we want our workplaces to be, would be, oh, she can't operate in any other way. And if I force her to do so, her brain will explode over time. And that's called cognitive stress. And Bob Chapman, a leadership expert that I love, credits workplace stress as the epidemic that's creating all of these issues in society, the hospitalizations, the obesity, all of these sorts of things, because most of us are under prolonged stress because we're not given permission to operate in a manner in which suits us. But
And
if we're compassionate, we can unleash that as a superpower.
Mhm. And I think that we can agree that most dental offices are quintessentially stressed.
Totally dysfunctional. Yeah,
We
I would
show
totally
up,
agree.
we just try to make it through the day,
Yeah.
appease Mrs. Jones,
Mhm.
thank the employees, and run home.
Reactive.
And
Totally.
yeah, and before I really understood all this, I would sit in my car before I would go into work, and I would just kind of do some deep breathing and just try to make myself go in and face the day.
Mhm.
And if we understand how to lead easier, because that's one of the things that stresses us out the most, right? Is how to lead these people we've hired. If we understand what they need and what we need, then all of a sudden we don't have to do all that deep breathing before we walk into the office.
I think you put it very well. It's this respect that we all have superpowers, and your superpowers are different than my superpowers. That can lead to collision, or that can lead to a beautiful collaboration. My follow through is quite low. That follow through for, and someone that's new to this, is how we organize and design. But I can generate ideas all day long as a 9 quick start. I'm a natural visionary, and I was always mad, like, why can these people not see that if we do this at 10 a.m., that at 3 p.m. it looks like this? But that's my superpower. That's not their superpower. And so in the case of follow through, I had an office manager named Ryan, and her follow through was like 8 or 9. And we just created this metaphor of, using a football analogy, that I can only get it to the 20-yard line and you punch it in for the touchdown. And we could do that all day long, because for me to ask her to innovate was ludicrous, and for her to ask me to stop writing things on the whiteboard as the next thing that we're going to do and pivot all day long would be short-circuiting my ability to function highly. And so we leverage those assets to create something really powerful within the organization. But if you ignore that, or don't know that, or you're oblivious to it, then bad things happen.
Can you take a minute just to give us a little background and explain those 4 co-native types, cognition types, so that our listeners aren't lost?
Right. So they're all, that you get a score from 1 to 10, but it's really important before I dive into that no score is bad. If we are
Right.
high intellect and we think a 3 is bad, so I'm bad at follow through, would be wrong answer in this frame. It's just, so like fact finder, I tend to have a low score on fact finder, but that means I'm to the point. So that can be a superpower, but it's not a superpower if I'm communicating with a high fact finder that needs lots of details. And they're like, why does he do this drive-by delegation? So there's 4 modus operandi. There's 4 modes within cognition. One is fact finder. That's how we gather and share information. The interesting thing about fact finders is they tend to live in the past, because facts come from the past into the present. Then you have follow through. That's how we organize and design. You were talking about that mode earlier with your associate. I am like you, have lots of clutter in my life. My wife likes to organize or hide things from me, and that creates some conflict, right? Because she thinks it's ludicrous. But literally, when I was training with Kathy Kolbe, she looked at me and she goes, "Oh, what an interesting MO." She goes, "David, I would encourage you to always wait to the last minute." And I've guilted myself forever to, why didn't I finish this PowerPoint 3 days ago? Why am I literally still revising it? I can't do that any other way when it comes to follow through. So follow through is how we organize and design. Quick start is how we deal with risk and uncertainty. Most people in a dental office, I have a 1 quick start client that is very low risk. We need to be very strategic, very methodical. And when we take a leap, it needs the outcome needs to be virtually guaranteed. That I respect very much, because he can't operate in any other way, because his ability to deal with risk and uncertainty is to stabilize, is to really make things very repetitious, very predictable. And there's a power in that too. And then the last is implementer. Most dentists, thinking back to dental school, the people that like I'm just starting my wax up and they're already out the door. Those were high implementers. Those are people that do function really well in the tangible world. The way that they deal with time is in the present because they're working on an implant case. The dentists who can sit at the chair all day long and want one big case, those are high implementers. I'm not that person. I like to bounce from chair to chair, and neither right nor wrong, but the organization is a reflection of the leader, and you can almost tell the owner's Kolbe by how the organization operates and where the frustration lies within the organization, because we are a team and sometimes we try and put square pegs in round holes, and eventually that will manifest in some sort of dysfunction within the organization, usually gossip and sterilization.
Yeah. Yeah, because now we're on to Brene Brown, because if you have a problem with somebody and you're listening to Brene Brown, what you'll learn is that usually what we do, instead of talking to that person, you talk to somebody else about that. But yeah, back to Kolbe. So my husband is a high implementer.
Okay.
And so he knows how to do all these things. We own properties, and I just help put the cash down when it's time to buy a new apartment complex or whatever. And he goes in and he makes a detailed list of every tool and supply that he's going to need. And then he fixes it all. He's Mr. Handyman himself. So it makes for an interesting, powerful, but sometimes frustrating team.
I grew up in a family of implementers, and I always wondered like why when it was time for me to change the oil, why I was always like screwing things up. Like I had no idea. And it was this big frustration point because on the farm, like you never called a mechanic for anything. You just figured it out. You just welded it, you cut it, you replaced it. And I was never any good at that. And I was always fascinated by how they can take this water heater that they knew nothing about and disassemble and put it back together. That, like you said, is a high implementer.
Yeah, he's really good at that. So we're talking about different not personalities, but clinician types. And I want to pull it into the dental office, and I want you to give me some archetypes, front desk, assistant, hygienist. What are we seeing in Kolbe types for those types of positions?
Most of them tend to be high fact finder, almost across the board, I find. You almost need a high follow through when it comes to a hygienist because of them. I call it mundane. I don't mean that as demeaning, but for a quick start, it's very mundane. To do the same thing over and over for 20 years would drive me insane, but we need those types in our team. So high follow through, how we organize and design. I always try to supplement my low follow through with high follow through. And I also find most of the team members, particularly the ones I've hired, to be really high fact finder, meaning they need lots of data, information, training in order to move forward, make change.
Yeah. Well, all three of my hygienists are high in fact finder. And I'm right now implementing or trying to implement a new way of doing biofilm removal.
Okay.
And since I'm high in quick start, so for the listeners, it's very fast for me to make a decision. I'm like, this sounds good, let's go this way. Whereas somebody who's low in quick start, they are usually higher in fact finder, and they're going to need the evidence before they are ready to make a change. And so what happens is I'll introduce something and I'll be like, this is what we're going to do. Doesn't that sound great? And then the hygienists are they get left feeling underinformed, and I get left feeling like, why aren't you following my lead? Is that
can I tell you a story about how this how my fascination with Kolbe came to be? I told you that I took a Kolbe almost by accident. I wasn't seeking it out. I had a hygienist who I met at a meeting in Atlanta. Her doctor said, she's moving to your town. And I was like, oh, I think I might have gotten a resume, but I already have 2 hygienists. And she said offline, she said, she's better than your best hygienist. I'm like, okay, well, you got my attention. So I entered this conversation with this hygienist, decided that I would find a place for her.
Mhm.
and it ended up proving to be a wise decision. And she helped me build this business, literally like referring, helped me orchestrate and systemize the team. But when I started to delegate, she would just pepper me in questions. And my story was that she's trying to sabotage the delegation because she doesn't want more work on her plate. And I
Mhm.
was coming from the golden rule, meaning I was giving her all the information that I would ever need.
Mhm.
And yet the ball would get dropped, the baton would get dropped again and again and again until I found out that she also had a Kolbe in passing. I asked to see it, and her high fact finder and my low fact finder were in
Mhm.
conflict every
Yeah.
single day,
Yeah.
and it was harming our relationship
Yeah.
as owner employee. And so
Mhm.
once I realized that I can't be stuck in my language, she's literally short circuiting with the information I'm giving her and being supremely patient, in my opinion, making sure that I answered all the questions, then we thrived again. But
Mhm.
um, from there, I knew that I needed that as a dashboard in my practice, like I needed to know the number of new patients, the amount of overhead, the amount of production and collections, because I think it allows us to have this humanistic frame that we desire as dentists, but we don't understand that it's a possibility. So we throw another checklist at it, which shoves them further and further away from typically their MO, their strengths.
Right. So you've said to me that hygienists, assistants, and front desk people, the people who come to us, they're typically high in fact finder,
Right.
and they need more information than we're picturing they need, right?
Well, most dentists have a fairly high fact finder. And so I
Okay.
think there's a relation there. But
Mhm.
for people like you and I who tend to have more of an entrepreneurial slant, it's like a
Mhm.
foreign language to us.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
buy my cars sight unseen. They deliver them, and anyone in my office thinks I'm crazy. I'm like, why do I need to test drive it? I know what it looks like. I only buy Jeep Wranglers. They gave me a fair trade in. Just drive it to my office, and you can drive home my old one. That it takes me moments to figure that out, but I can't operate in any other way. But to a high fact finder, that's pure insanity.
Mhm.
So give me some examples of how you introduce change or correction to someone who's high in fact finder, since that's typically who we're talking about. All the ladies who are listening to this podcast, they got little um, clubs of fact finders working for them. So what do we do that we didn't realize we needed to do?
I spend a ton of time in meetings, meaning giving proper allowance to that need to be understood and make sure that when I'm delegating, at first I thought it was supremely inefficient, but in hindsight, now I realize how many fires it prevented versus my normal frame, which would be fire putting out fires all day long, the
Mhm.
reactive
Mhm.
situation that you were talking about. And it builds loyalty, it builds autonomy, it unleashes this motivation because you're literally just sitting with the idea of, I refuse to talk more than 20% of the time. I'm here to listen. I'm here to answer questions. I'm here to ask questions. What more information do you need to move forward?
Mhm.
What is getting in your way? What is working? What is not working? Becoming a coach as opposed to this I mean, relentless leader is really what I was. Like, let's go. It's not good enough. It's not fast enough. Let's step on the gas. All of my environments had looked like that. But when I stopped and paused and realized that the people that work for me deserve more kindness and compassion, and that it really drives to the bottom line. I'm not a money motivated guy, but that activity of reducing turnover, giving them the permission and the information they need to make more and better decisions serves the patient, gets work and worry off your plate, which is a
Mhm.
profitable exercise,
Mhm.
and ultimately drives to the bottom line, like I said. So there's no one that gets left out in this process. You're no longer the bottleneck. You're removing yourself because you're giving them permission to be themselves and fly. And that's the cool part about this is it's this realization that they're far better at this thing than you are, and
Mhm.
therefore they should own that zone almost completely. You need to check in, you need to trust but verify, certainly as a leader, but a lot of times we're throttling back their motivation, we're throttling back their productivity because we're managing the process as opposed to the result.
Okay. Um, I'm going to ask you a follow-up question that I think every person listening to this podcast is going to say in their mind. But David, I don't have time to have meetings. We are so busy. And then I have to hurry home to my family. So what do you say to that?
I think the biggest cost in a practice is team turnover, team discord. Unhappy players don't play well. I mean, they just don't perform.
Mhm.
And by not, there's this phrase that kind of haunts me because it took me like 4 or 5 times to realize it, is there's no such thing as suppressed emotion. So you can put them in the deal with it idea for long enough, but it's going to
Mhm.
explode as a surprise resignation, team mutiny, division. Like those two used to get along. Why do they not get along anymore? Because of
Mhm.
suppressed emotion. So if you don't facilitate that conversation and you don't, I consider meetings to be leadership training. I'm not going to tell a 19-year-old assistant that I'm making them a leader, but
Mhm.
for them to have more autonomy is really them being leaders. I'm giving them a budget for ordering. And if I don't spend all of that time, I get it. I was the same person of like, can I just do another crown prep? That's far more profitable than this. But meetings done right that are brief and high voltage, I would argue are the highest ROI activity because it prevents so many bottlenecks. It
Mhm.
is unleashing this human potential that we're talking about, where we start to understand their frustrations and use that as the raw material for the next opportunity. It helps me innovate when I know exactly what's going on with the Cavitron, all of these things that I could care less about in the first 3 years of my practice. It allows me to empower them to make that decision. Why do I need to call the rep for the cone beam? Can somebody that doesn't require a dental license? And you get them stepping forward through coaching and saying, I believe in you, and that's a great idea, and praise. If you don't make time for that, you better make time for interviews, hiring, firing, all of these sorts of things. So yeah. So I get it. I've been there. I would have argued the same thing at a certain point in my career, but I was forced to create a talent magnet in a resort town. And I'm glad I was, because I would have continued on that same spiral to the point where there's no hygienist left. Who am I going to even have to run my giant hygiene, roles? So that's my answer, is that you are in proactive prevention mode with these meetings. If you want to be reactive, then things get really ugly. That leads to the loss of stomach lining, sleepless nights. So
Right. Yeah. So, and I would add, if someone's telling me they don't have time to have meetings, what they're thinking, more globally, is that they don't have time to lead. And I would like to say that you don't have time not to lead, because if you don't lead, then the practice just goes this way and that way and stops serving you as an asset, starts serving itself. And it becomes that dysfunctional place because we're not leading. And having meetings is a part of leading, because otherwise, when do we get a chance to talk about the Cavitron, or how we're submitting insurance claims, or the language that we're using with our new patients and things, all the things, every single little task that the dental team does for us creates our dental practice. And so if we want them to do it the way we see, and we want to get their input too, we have to talk about it. And we can't just talk about it at a huddle or at non-huddles. We have to sit down, have a meal, and really talk about how people are doing.
Yeah, I appreciate totally what you're saying there. I've found, it took me some searching and some safe containers, that I don't have time is really a facade for I don't know how, and I don't want to stand in front of a room and suck at it. And that's okay too.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be this 20-minute PowerPoint presentation. I would argue that that's not the great meeting. It's a facilitated meeting, like I said, where you're literally using compelling questions to make sure that everyone's ideas matter, everyone's voice matters, that you're empowering them to implement. So if you
Mhm.
think that it's just you broadcasting for 25 minutes, then I think we need to break that frame and just say literally it's more of a listening exercise and
Mhm.
making sure that we've taken these frustrations, built out a plan to reduce that friction and frustration. And that leads to all the innovation that you would ever want in a dental practice. They're literally telling you how you become more unique and valuable to the marketplace on a
Sure.
regular basis if you're good at that.
So what I've found with my fact finder employees is that if I sit down and I say, this is what I see as where we're going, and then I say, what concerns do you have about that? Then I actually, this is where they shine. They can tell me what's a potential problem. And then if they're behind me in my leadership, they can say possible solutions as well.
I love that you say that because they're literally pointing out the dangers that we're oblivious to.
Yeah, exactly.
Like there's risk. I'm sorry.
Oh.
I don't.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's the part where we look at our high fact finders as like, these are assets in our practice. And it is nice. I'm always trying to get a balance of different types of cognition types in the practice. But what we tend to attract is high fact finders.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I think, yeah, I think we have to appreciate the predictability that they bring to our organizations. And sometimes we slow them up to a degree if we're not quick starts. But if we really get to the point where we're appreciating that everyone has superpowers, I think that's the thing that I admire most about Kathy, is that my strength and my weakness as an employer has always been I see potential in everyone. And sometimes they don't see it or they don't want it. But if you start to allow them the awareness and the confidence to say, like, you're super awesome at this and you're way better than I am. Can you take hold of this? And you connect it to the science of it's on this 16-page report. And you show them, it says, do more of this. It says, don't do this anymore. Now you're really giving them an opportunity. My goal, because I knew that I was in a resort town, it was high turnover, even if I take care of people really well, because the cost of living gets to people. And then they move back to Denver or St. Louis or wherever the grandparents are. My goal had to be that I was going to make sure that they were better humans than when they started working for me. And I think through this system, it allowed that to happen in a very predictable manner. But I couldn't have done that with my own instincts. I needed some tangible report to say, not only do I believe in you, but I see here that you're kind of an unstoppable force if we just put this on your plate.
And I would just like to point out, just from like my coaching background, that when you tell an employee you see their strengths and that you want to develop that, that creates an opportunity for them to feel what I believe dental employees want to feel, which is helpful and appreciated. And if we can generate that helpful feeling and the appreciation, everything else falls into line, because then they're going to do that. Feeling will drive them to do what you want them to do to make your practice amazing.
I was on a call with a leader who has hundreds and hundreds of employees, and the question that was posed to him was, how do you make sure that they are rising in their capabilities and their confidence? And he said exactly what you said. I know if I can recognize where their superpowers lie and then pour into that and praise and connect that to the vision and outcome that we have, I have a team member who will dedicate themselves to the process, because even if they're 40 years old, 50 years old, I know that act of kindness was one of two or three people in their entire life history that has done that thing, recognized that thing that they kind of inherently know, like, I'm kind of good at this, but it gets suppressed because of the things that we're talking about. They haven't gotten the permission to be themselves, but you recognize those assets and then you pour praise on it and connect it to the mission of the company or the dental practice in this case. No one is willing to do that. And it sounds so simple, but lies dormant amongst almost all organizations, hence why you go into almost any business now and get poor customer service, because we're not literally leveraging and harnessing the talents and capabilities of the people that we have, and they're operating at like maybe 10 or 15% until they think they can find another dollar or a slightly more empathetic employer.
Right. But if they're like literally excited to be there because they love helping people, which is always why people go to hygiene and assisting school, because they love to help people. So if we can engender that by leading well, and Kolbe is a part of that, in my opinion, then we have happier employees, AKA a better business, and happier patients and happier us.
I believe in this so much that if literally that's all we did, we would be more profitable. Like, you don't barely have to measure anything else, because the productivity explosion and the reduction of work and worry and friction and bottlenecks, and 3 hygienists looking at the Shine catalog trying to decide what prophy paste to choose, like, goes away, because this is giving them the power to make decisions. And that's at the root cause of any sort of thing that you're doing in a business.
Yeah. And it's a challenge. If you're a successful dentist, you're spending most of your time being the technician, the head technician of the office. But like we said, taking the time to do this, it will pay you in dividends way more than the next crown prep.
Yeah. The one thing that I think will help set dentists free, if they're averse to this meeting and really connecting and understanding patients, because we are time starved. Like, that's the reality of it. We have too many roles, too many goals. Everyone wants a bite of us, right? You have maybe team members, you have PPOs that are happy to suppress your fees. You have vendors who are sometimes predatory and see the margins and want to take a slice of that. And they know that you're tired and distracted. So you're easy prey.
We are easy.
Yeah. But the one thing that in the brain science that's very clear is that when we're switching tasks all day long, and just switching from patient to patient is one thing, but literally if you're going from dentist to CMO to CFO to HR all day long, it's the most inefficient, exhausting process. So think of these meetings as a file folder in which the hygiene department issues get addressed. And then we have this file folder where we look at the numbers and we take off our dentist hat and we put on the CFO hat. That undistracted time is so productive and so valuable. And if you do it any other way, it'll create all of that anxiety and conflict, because literally by 2:00, you don't know who you are, because you've been switching hats all day long. To appreciate that these are very different strengths, and that to do it as a distraction, you might be able to do dentistry in your sleep at this point in time, but these other things, particularly connecting with team members, deserves all of your attention, because if you don't make time now, you'll make time to beg them back, or like we said, hire the next employee. So when I help a dentist see that this is a file folder just to make sure all of these things get addressed, and that your brain operates at a much higher effective efficiency in doing so, then nobody wants to operate at 20%. They want to be high performing, intelligent, and to know that you're throttling down by doing all of these things at once, and you're really disabling yourself in your business, I think is enough permission to go ahead and say, Tuesday afternoons, I wear this hat and then this hat, not all simultaneously.
Yes. And that's I like what you just said, because if we're going to do this type of leadership, we literally have to just put it on the schedule. And if you're listening to this right now and you're like, hey, I basically work for Delta Dental, I'm booked out for the next 5 months. No problem. Put it on the schedule now, and you'll have your first meeting 5 months from now. That time will arrive. But if you put off putting it on the schedule, then it never gets there. Yeah. So let's pretend we've got listeners, well, I'm sure we do, who are like, yes, okay, you have convinced me. I know I need to do this Kolbe thing. So where do I start? What do they do?
You can go to Kolbe.com and get these assessments. I think they're around $55. I will tell you the reporting that comes. There's a voice activated thing. Like, if literally you and your team members literally just read it, you will have a level of self-awareness that is kind of, it will be unprecedented in most organizations in your community, particularly dental practices.
Yeah.
Um,
And
go
they
ahead.
have different tests. I found the website to be a little bit confusing. Somebody had to tell me, you take the Kolbe-A.
Yeah.
The B
Yeah,
and
Kolbe-
C are more, they're different, not for the newbie. Right.
Right. I would just start with Kolbe-A because that will point out where the superpowers are, where their strengths are, and where the potential conflicts are. Those
Yes.
conflicts don't have to stay there because to me, you can jujitsu that thing, is flip the script and those become collaboration efforts. But I would start with the A and just getting super aware, one, with who you are, and then roll that out and then have a team meeting to dialogue about kind of the epiphanies and paradigm shifts that happened at an individual level. But I will say, if you can get to the point where it's common nomenclature, it almost becomes this laughing thing. Like, don't give it to Doc, he's a 2 follow through. Give it to Ryan, she's an 8 follow through.
Exactly.
Where it becomes this community thing. It reminds me, I lived in Italy for 2 years as an army dentist, and our landlord, Christian, and Louisa lived right next door to us. So we'd go over to dinner all the time, and my Italian was mediocre and his English was mediocre, but yet we'd host dinners and I would be the interpreter, and Christian and I had this like middle language, and it was kind of like charades, it was kind of English, it was kind of Italian, and it was enough to get to have a really enjoyable meal. And once you start to speak other people's language and find the middle ground, it unlocks all of these opportunities that are literally hidden in plain sight. I can't tell you what they are, but I can tell you that they're always there, and you can double down on these again and again and again, because these are your team members' instincts. They're built inside of them. They've just been suppressed for so long that once you start to unleash them, you're like, oh, I didn't know, I had no idea. And they're like, I had no idea either.
And there's light bulbs where they realize that they're not wrong.
Right.
They're just, this is who they are, and they're perfect the way they are, and it makes them strong.
Yeah, that's the thing that I love about the report. It says, congratulations,
you
got a perfect score.
Exactly. Yeah. And this is just another aside, but honestly, the team members kind of like taking these tests. Like, it's fun to sit and take them and then sit down together and just talk about what it means. The self-awareness is fun, and the teamwork realizations are fun too. So.
Totally. Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Any last words as far as advice about cognition and leadership and leading dental employees?
I hear so much about the inability to even find people. I know now is this season of the economy where people will sign up for an interview and then not show up, all of these sorts of things. So to me, it's clear moving forward that employee engagement is the game to be won. You can, it's not about more pay necessarily. You have to be competitive. It's not about more benefits necessarily. It's literally about unlocking the potential of the people on your payroll, because once you give them that, they start to realize that that's not available anywhere else. The frameworks and the opportunities to rise in my autonomy, mastery, and purpose is so rare that they won't leave that for another dollar. If they have to move, they'll regret it. And they'll send you an email like, I didn't appreciate what I had right there. So if you want to take care of patients, if you want a profitable business, if you want time freedom, to me, the work that we're talking about here today, Laura, and then I know, like you said, the sermon that you preach again and again is employee engagement, helping them find that 5% more, 10% more, because who's to lose in that situation? It pays, because patients are better taken care of. A patient knows if they're amongst a confident employee or somebody who's throttled back. It's good for you because you have less in work and worry, because some of these things you used to do now are completely taken care of better by somebody else. That drives to productivity in the bottom line. So I will preach the sermon of employee engagement for as long as I can, but I think as an industry, we have a long, long way to go. So I'm glad that the industry has people like you, Laura, that have found the dysfunction, then found the function, and like, I can't believe I ever operated in a different way.
Yes. Yeah. And being able to share it like you and I both do brings so much satisfaction to my life. And
Same.
To anyone listening, things can get better. Let's work together and make it happen.
Well said.
Okay. Well, Well, thanks for taking the time to let me interview you, pick your brain about Kolbe and everything.
So fun.
And I'm sure we'll be running into each other again very soon at some dental function.
I'd like that.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Laura, have a great day. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Love Your Practice with Dr. Laura Mock. I would love to meet you. To join our movement, find the Facebook group called Love Your Practice and request to join. If you can't find it, just send me a message and I'll add ya. You'll find me there helping all of my ladies to fall in love with their businesses and have a better life.